Okay, not all fictional Korean men, just the hottest ones. I'm so sorry for the clickbait title. I just had to. But is it really clickbait? Barely.
So if you ask me how I'm doing, I'm feeling peppy, sprightly, spry. I'm getting by. I'm getting by. And it's something I'd like to demystify. It's not a phase. I'm not confused. Not indecisive. I don't have the gotta choose blues. I don't care if you wear high heels or a tie. You might just catch my eye because I'm definitely bi.
In my first video on what I'd learned about K-dramas, which you should really watch for context, it's up here and linked down below, I talk about how Korean men in K-dramas are just inherently sexier to me than men in Western shows and movies. Or roll the clip.
So many male leads in K-dramas are just nice men. At least in the last decade, that's become a growing trend anyway. Which feels like an incredibly low bar, but my god is it nice to see. I won't get too much into this because I've got a whole video coming out about it, but male leads in K-dramas are so sexy. Partly because culturally they tend to be more outwardly chivalrous, partly because a lot of them are written by women, and partly because a lot of them are unintentionally written to be bisexual. I'm bisexual, or rather biromantic. But oftentimes I will swing wildly between imposter syndrome on either side, either wondering if I'm secretly straight or secretly gay, because people on either side insist that must be the case, and sometimes you let the imposter syndrome get to you. But there's something about male leads in K-dramas that meant even when I was only feeling attraction to men, I never mistook that for heterosexuality. So basically, my journey through COVID has been realizing that despite my asexuality, I would still fuck any sexy fictional man that exists, and you may quote me on that.
As I mentioned in that video, rather flippantly, a lot of Korean male leads are unintentionally written to be bisexual. I really want to explore that, but first of all, I want to break down what a bisexual man looks like on screen. And I'm not talking about the kinds of bisexual men that are, like, openly bisexual on screen, because, and this is depressing, most of those tend to be cheaters. Taking BLs out of the equation, just talking about, like, mainstream Western media, or, like, Netflix shows, things like that. Thing that's coming to mind right now is, like, Elite, because season 6 just dropped, and oh boy. A lot of male bisexual representation in media tends to just be cheating, which is very depressing. I don't mean that. I don't mean that kind of weird thing that we've got going on at the moment. It seems to be replacing bury your gays as like the main... Anyway, that's not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is men who appear bisexual in temperament without it necessarily being written in as like canon bisexual, or even if they are canon bisexual, like the kinds of behaviors actual bisexual men in real life exhibit, so that you're like, huh, I'm getting a vibe. This doesn't mean he outwardly hits on other men or even expresses attraction to other men necessarily, although that does help. For example, in Spider-Man No Way Home, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man is so bisexual, yet he never says he is or hits on any men or waves a little bi flag while fighting crime. I mean, he may as well be. So how do we know he's bisexual? It's the everything about him. It's the fact that he threw up a peace sign as a goodbye. It's the fact that he's a bit chaotic at all times, but has also drunk a huge vat of respect women juice. As my friend Adam, a bisexual man, pointed out, it's the way he's totally comfortable expressing affections for other men in a perhaps awkward way, but is confused as to why it would be awkward because doesn't everyone love everyone?
I love you guys.
It's the way he sits. A lot of it I can't even put my finger on. It's just a little spidey sense in the back of my head that goes, ah yes, a fellow queer. A lot of male portrayals in romances, or anything really, rely on our cultural idea of what a man is. In the West, that's resting on hundreds of years of toxic masculinity and repression. In Korea, there are equally a lot of negative ways a man is taught to be, particularly in line with our idea of men repressing feelings, and also misogyny, because there's literally no escaping misogyny. But their expressions of masculinity among other men is very different. Not only are they more androgynous in style and expression, it's not rare for Korean men to wear makeup, but they behave differently as well. Korean men don't find physical affection to be as weird as Western men do. In the West, that shit's gay. Nobody wants to be seen as gay. Am I right, lads? Let's go to the pub and glass some people for their opinions at football instead! In Korea, it's a lot more normal to just be hugging your bros, or smacking each other's butts, or playing with each other's fingers. It's why it's so easy for people to ship members of K-pop groups together, because when you see men be so close and clingy and physically affectionate towards each other in a way that Americans or British men wouldn't, your mind immediately jumps to, they must be secretly dating. Which is a problem for a few different reasons, but that's not what this video is about. If you want me to make a sequel video to my Kit Connor one about why shipping real people is bad, let me know. And also, maybe give me some money so I can get into the witness protection program for when the K-pop stans hunt me down for it. Anyway, my point is that men who are more comfortable being physically or emotionally affectionate with each other, and who have drunk giant vats of respect women juice, are more likely to be construed as bisexual by Western audiences, simply because that's our lived experience. Bisexual men behave differently. A lot of times, not all the time. Some of them are just straight men wearing nice hats. They are inherently queer in the way they love other people, even down to their friendships, even when dating women. Because bisexual people, no matter how much the world tries to tell us we're not, are queer as hell. We've had to grow up examining our relationships to other people in a way that most straight people simply haven't. And while there aren't almost any explicit bisexual male characters on screen, there are loads of men who are coded as bisexual, intentionally or otherwise. And bisexual love plots just look different. Which brings me to... I've said before on this channel that I hate rom-coms. It was actually one of the first videos I ever posted here, and it's now the earliest public video available on this channel. I stand by pretty much everything I said in it. Most 2000s rom-coms don't work for me because they're rushed, they're impersonal, and they rely on a ubiquitous idea of sexual attraction ruling everything. I also said in that video about K-dramas that my love of K-drama romances is because of my love of period dramas. Beyond K-dramas, one of my favourite genres of content is period dramas, because I was a Shakespeare and Jane Austen nerd throughout my entire childhood and teen years, and that shaped the person I grew up into. Basically, I'm a fucking delight, is what I'm saying. But part of why period romances in particular were my favourite is that for an undiagnosed asexual... Can I say that? For an as-yet out-of-the-closet, even to herself, asexual, those romances were more appealing to me than your run-of-the-mill modern rom-com. I never got the whole love at first sight thing. I never understood why in so many rom-coms the main leads spend half of their time being insanely incompatible and then fix it with a grand romantic gesture. Which I fucking hate, by the way. Nothing would make me dump you faster than doing a flash mob proposal or giving a speech in front of all of my colleagues. That's not romantic, that's terrifying. And by now, we should all be aware of my love of period dramas. Period romances are built on establishing an emotional and romantic connection between the two leads in a way that modern rom-coms just aren't. Largely because they don't have an element of sexual tension in them. At least not one that can be explicitly spoken about in the text. They have to establish compatibility and chemistry through conversation and interactions and the way they look at and talk to each other. You know, like how actual relationships work, as opposed to the noughties rom-com idea of love at first sight or manipulating each other into falling in love. British period dramas are all about the subtext, and that's love, baby! Love, at least for me, is in the smallest of moments. It's why, despite my general hatred of the 2005 Pride and Prejudice movie, and I do hate it, to the point where I've considered making a full video on it before, but didn't because I didn't want to rewatch it to make notes. It was hard enough just making that clip for my persuasion video. Despite that, there is one moment in that film that perfectly portrays Darcy's character, and I'm sure you all know what moment I'm talking about. It's the hands, Obviously it's the hands. It's literally always the hands. Hands are for the gays. For legal reasons, that's the joke. Heads are allowed to love the hands. Darcy helps Lizzie into the carriage and then calmly says goodbye, and then all his repressed feelings are pushed into the hand he touched hers with, and he can't help but flex it as he walks away, like those feelings need to go somewhere. If the entire movie has been as subtle and well executed as that one clip, I would love it, but it's not, so I don't. My favourite moments in anything are the tiny character moments, like everything Batman and Wonder Woman have going on in the Cartoon Network Justice League series.
1. Dating within the team always leads to disaster. 2. You're a princess from a society of immortal warriors. I'm a rich kid with issues. Lots of issues. And 3. If my enemies knew I had someone special, they wouldn't rest until they'd gotten to me through her.
Next.
Or the way Richard Donut's character in the 39 Steps is berating Pamela while also offering her a handkerchief and helping fix her hair.
I'm telling it to you now for the third time. There's a dangerous conspiracy against this island, and we're the only people who can stop it. Think what you've seen happen right under your very nose.
The tiny moments always reveal so much more about a character's true nature than the big sweeping scenes, not just on screen either, but in life. People don't show themselves to you in big ways. They reveal themselves in pieces. And the smaller those pieces are, the more of them you can see. K-dramas, more than anything else, remind me of period dramas. Not actual Korean period dramas, by the way. That's a whole genre on its own. But their modern rom-coms and romance dramas remind me of British period dramas in the sense that the romance is built from the ground up instead of the outside in. So many Korean romances are made in the tiny moments. Like the hand-holding scene in Something in the Rain.
아직은 그런 거
Or the slow falling in love through conversations in Run On.
달리는 게 지각인 건 어떤 기분이에요?
숨찬 기분.
We literally swoon when she says she's too hot and then he puts his hands around a bucket of ice for the next few minutes of the scene, and the next time she says she's too hot, he puts his hands on her cheeks.
열이 좀 나는 것 같기도 하고. 나 얼굴 빨개?
I didn't even notice this the first time until he did it. I'm not kidding, I literally swooned! Sure, a lot of them have the big moments too, but they're usually not grand romantic gestures the way we're used to seeing them. So much of the relationship in Homecha is them having arguments and then discussing how they can communicate better. Sure, they go dancing in the rain at the beach, and sure, they show up at each other's doorsteps in a huff, but it all makes sense in the context of who these people are. The big moments often lead to small moments where they can actually talk and live in those feelings. Some K-dramas do have variations of love at first sight in them, but oftentimes they'll elaborate on this feeling in a way that shows that their growing understanding of the other person is what is truly making them fall in love, rather than the initial infatuation. Two examples of this are Strong Woman Do Bong-soon and Happiness, both characters played by Park Kyung-sik, a man I am dangerously on the edge of developing a parasocial relationship with, because he keeps playing characters I can't help but fall in love with. Oh my god, King, help! In Happiness, he quite literally falls for Saebon when she pushes him off the building in high school. It makes sense in context. But that love is shown to have grown into something more over the years that followed. They're close friends, and he's clearly only fallen for her more the longer he's known her. But he never tries to force it on her or make her feel bad for not reciprocating those feelings, because he's a good person and I'm in love with him, and also the bar is on the floor.
네, 괜찮아요?
최고야. 내가 이런 데서 만나서 좋아하게 됐거든. 이렇게 맑고 파란 하늘에 끝내주는 날.
In Do Bong-soon, he sees her beat the shit out of a bunch of thugs and immediately becomes a massive simp for her, hiring her to be his bodyguard and generally just being insanely infatuated with her the entire time. Think this, but for an entire series.
I sure hope a buff survival lady doesn't choke me out with her juicy biceps. That would be... Oh, that would just be so bad and so painful. Oh, I'd hate that so much.
But he really starts to fall in love with her while she's working as his bodyguard and they're spending time together, because that's how real love works. On top of this, it's a pretty major plot point that everyone thinks he's gay. It's a whole thing.
집에 여자 경우만 쓰는데요?
저희 대표님이 남자를 좋아하는 취미라서 스캔들 보고 차원에서.
Something that he plays up on purpose in one of my favourite scenes in any TV show ever! The second male lead, who is a cop, a cab, shows up to bring Bong-soon home because she shouldn't be sleeping in a man's house unsupervised. Yay, misogyny! And my man, my husband, love of my life, just starts hitting on the cop as a power move.
식구자. 당신도 같이 자고 가면 좋은데.
I cannot tell you how many times I have rewatched this scene. I sent it to like 4 different people immediately. It's like a hit of serotonin directly to my brain. Anybody who tries to tell me this character is not bisexual clearly does not have eyes or is a biphobe. So when I say all, I mean the sexiest ones, because there are plenty of K-dramas, particularly before about 2014, where the male leads are upsettingly heterosexual. Very toxic straight male culture. I'm talking about Boys Over Flowers, I'm talking Oh My Venus, Master's Sun, You Are My Destiny. There are, of course, exceptions to this, like with the main lead in Coffee Prince, which came out all the way back in 2007, who is actually pretty explicitly bisexual. He falls in love with her when he thinks she's a man and spends a lot of the show dealing with that, and then never walks it back after he realizes she's a woman. Their first kiss happens when he still thinks she's a man.
네가 남자건 외계인이건 이제 상관 안 해. 정리하는 거 힘들어서 못 해보겠으니까 가보자, 갈 때까지. 한번 가보자.
You cannot get more bisexual than a man kissing a woman he thinks is another man. That's pretty queer, my dudes. Small and minor sidebar about the body swap / gender swap plots in K-dramas. There's a few of those. Japan does as well, but we're talking about K-dramas right now. You've got Coffee Prince, main one, obviously. You've got the King's Affection, which is something that came out earlier this year, end of last year, which is a woman who is pretending to be the Prince Regent. It's a period drama. Rawoon's character like falls in love with her while still thinking that she's the prince. And then you've got Mr. Queen, about a male character in the future who gets body swapped with the Queen back then, and so it's like a man in the Queen's body. Sidebar, that actress is fucking hysterical. She's so cool. I like her so much. But that whole show is like very queer. Their dynamic and their relationship is very, very queer. And he's clearly like falling in love with the king as like the man's soul inside the woman's body. And that's really interesting because a lot of it is played for laughs, but there are these really earnest moments where like he really cares. Like they really love each other. And the king loves the version of the Queen that is actually him. And so it's really interesting to see that like transcendence of gender in that. The only downside is that at the end of Mr. Queen, they sort of write it that he goes back to his own body and then the Queen goes back back in hers, and the king notices something different, but like it's not explicitly said that he gets it, and it's really frustrating because that was an explicitly bisexual plot, and people loved that show because it was an explicitly kind of bisexual plot. And the problem is that they couldn't commit to it because they were so scared of it being seen as like openly queer as a show that they were like, and then he went back to his body and the queen returned and everything was back to normal and it's all fine and gender is normal, which is weird. For the most part, that show is brilliant. Like that show would be in my top 10 if it didn't have that fucking irritating ending. As it is, it's still in my list of favorites, but it's lower. But it is very interesting that Korea and Japan as well have a lot of interesting plot lines of quite big popular shows where they swap gender or body swap and things like that. I think it's really interesting commenting on like people want to talk about gender, people want to have conversations about sexuality out there, and they couldn't do it for a long time, so they sort of fed it into allegory and body swap plot lines, and I just think that's really like fun and interesting. I think that's a cool thing. But particularly more recent K-dramas seem to just be exclusively helmed by the most bisexual men I have ever seen. Everyone in Hwarang for a start. Every character Ji-sung or Lee Dong-wook has ever played.
잠깐만 벗어줘. 내가
잠시 실례하겠습니다. 이 친구 오늘 인사드릴 분들이 많아서 잠시 빌려가겠습니다.
네.
여기부터 내가 나도 저 인간한테 갚아줄 게 많거든. 자기야. 자기 오늘 화 많이 났나 보네.
중요해. 난 네가 전생에 뭐였든 뭘 했든 하나도 안 중요해.
진짜?
네가 뭘 했든 난 한결같이 네가 싫거든.
Woo Jae-hwan in Mad Dog.
절대 아닐걸요? 너 내기할래? 내기? 제가 이긴 뭘 줄 건데요? 뭐 줄까? 매드도? 뭐? 그래줄게.
Lee Jung-gi's character in Lawless Lawyer.
이태리 명품 옷이라서 이거 구겨지는 게 싫거든. 저거 벗고 한판 뜹시다. 응? 자, 뭐이씨. 자, 요거 들면 5년, 내리면 2년, 들었다 놓으면 이 판사가 정상 참작해 주는데.
Every single character in Run On except for the one that was gay and the abusive dad.
어젠 제가 제정신이 아니었어요. 옆에 있던 게 누구든 봉변 당했을 것 같은데.
아니 그게 누구든 상관없었으면 옆에 최태리는 아빠도 있었잖아. 기성겸 씨가 이성애자라서 그런가?
기선겸입니다.
인물이 하도 훤해서 아유 난 여잔 줄 알아.
저한텐 이런 한 푼 안 떨어지거든요.
안 내고 오셔서 몰랐어요. 없죠. 오늘 휴강이니까. 왜 이러는 거예요? ET 하자고 한 거 아니에요?
나 어렸을 때 축구한 거 알죠? 네가 고자질만 안 했어도 지금 내 홍보장이 토트넘이야.
야, 네가 고작 축구한다는 것도 내가 아우팅에서 관두게 한 거 기억 안 나냐?
감각치정 이런 건 염려 마세요. 저는 무성애자거든요.
기선겸이라고 합니다. 뭐야? 형이 뭘 잘 훔치긴 해. 내가 뭘 훔쳐요?
연애 대상에 남성이 포함되어 있습니까?
근데 동거인분 그때 분명 무성애자시라고 하시지 않으셨어요?
무로맨틱은 아니에요. 스펙트럼이 워낙 넓으니까.
연애를 안 하는 주의는 아니었다는 거지.
Sung-hoon's character in Player, I mean, he is a fast-talking con-man committing heists, so that's inherently bisexual, even if you try and play it as straight as possible, which he isn't.
나하고는 히스토리가 좀 있지.
작업 쳤었어요?
야, 너 남자도 작업치냐? 재밌냐? 너 그래서 계속 나 손잡고 막 터치하고. 내 스타일 아니에요.
And of course, the love of my life, played by Kim Bong, Lee Rang from The Tale of the Nine-Tailed. He's so bisexual I could cry.
우리 좀 만나.
거절한다.
니네 집에다 확 불질러 버린다.
600살 넘고 초딩짓 하는 거 하나도 안 겨워.
후회할 텐데.
어쩌다 이렇게 된 거야?
물렸어. 알고 보니까 맛집이었던 거지 내가.
Look at him and tell me you wouldn't fall in love immediately! Some of these men have throwaway lines flirting with their friends or strangers, but mostly it's the vibes. Real recognizes real, and queer people recognize other queer people. It's also in the inherent queerness of their relationships. I said earlier, bisexual men love people in an inherently queer way, even if they're dating people of the opposite sex. If that doesn't make sense to you, let me put it like this. Found family is a big part of the lived queer experience, even for those of us whose parents accept us, because in media and in our lives, a giant chunk of the people we see are not representative of our experience. Men are taught to objectify women from a young age, but they're also taught that being gay is bad. So men who feel things for both will either grow up objectifying both to push back against the latter idea, or, far more commonly, I hope, they will realise early on that the objectification thing is bad, because if you're not doing it to both, then clearly there's a problem there. Then they'll start objectifying both, or neither, depending on who they are. In my case, I did both and neither. Welcome to being a biromantic asexual, boys. It's great here. So when you have to examine your sexual and romantic feelings towards both men and women in the teen years when all the straight boys aren't, your relationships to those feelings evolves differently. So bisexual men are more likely to think about women's feelings in a given situation. Like gay men, they're often the kinds of men that women feel safe around because they trust them not to take advantage of or dismiss them. Obviously, this doesn't go for all bisexual men, just like not all straight men are bad at thinking about women's feelings. And I'm not saying that no woman has ever had a shitty experience with a bi man, but on the whole, bi men are just more likely to be respectful of women because they've had to examine their relationships to women since childhood, and that affects the way you behave around them. The reason why so many K-drama leads feel explicitly or implicitly bisexual isn't just he's got good chemistry with the other male characters as well, although that does help.
상처는 아물었네.
하영민 교수님이시죠? 말씀 많이 들었습니다. 우리 병원 최고의 서전이시라고.
예, 뭐 그렇긴 한데 누구?
우와, 이 손이 그 명성자자 신들린 손이구나. 뜻밖의 손이 참 고우시다.
제가 평소에 관리.
It's in how they love the female leads. It's the way they go about, God forbid I'm about to use this phrase, but courting them. It's not just a guy hitting on a girl until she gives in and dates him. It's about the simping. It's about waiting respectfully. It's about being a positive force in her life. It's about acknowledging her feelings as just as important as his. It's about the simping. It's about the found families. It's about the finger guns and peace signs. It's the way they sit. It's about the simping.
I would hate that. Oh, I'd hate getting pegged.
So, no, not all fictional Korean men are bisexual, but the hottest ones are. Once again, I have not written a conclusion for this. I'm really bad. I get to the end of a video and I'm like, oh, that's a killer line to end on, and then I just don't write any like post-amble for the credits, or not that I have credits yet, but still, like most YouTubers have like a little bit at the end, a little couple minutes where it's just like, and then outro, and I just don't have that. But I do just want to talk about like bisexual men, because big ups to all my bisexual bros. They've been some of the most supportive people to me. Like, it's weirdly, as a queer person, and I'm going to talk about this a lot in my asexuality video, like there are subsets of the queer community that just like don't accept other sections of the queer community, which is really weird because we're supposed to be like the solidarity ones, but apparently not. And bisexual men I have had the most positive experience with overall. So like, sure, maybe a lot of this could be seen as me just like putting headcanons onto characters that I like, but I think I'm right. I think I'm right, and I think you'll see that when you watch the show. You'll watch the shows and be like, oh, bisexual, I see. It's giving. You know, it things like Beyond Evil, where like, I don't know if they're necessarily bisexual, but like that shit is queer as fuck. There are a lot of Korean shows that like to a Western audience, and I don't know about Korean audiences, but to a Western audience feel very queer because of how they act around each other, how they behave. And a lot of that is in the writing, and a lot of that is in the acting, and a lot of it is just in, you know, like subtext. I enjoy all of it. Particularly every character that Park Hyung-sik has ever played. That man is just like, it's like David Tennant, you know, where it's like that man just plays every character slutty, kind of bi. He's just one of those. His career is that, which I think is delightful. But I do think we should have like more explicitly bisexual representation on screen, and that doesn't necessarily mean seeing a man kiss both a man and a woman like Elite seems to fucking think it is. I want more like, you know, positive bisexual male representation on screen where they're just sort of casually bisexual. Like, I'm writing a movie at the moment with a guy and it's just sort of casually bisexual. It's just a part of his character. Like, it's just who he is. And I love that. It's fun. I want more of that like casual queer representation on screen, and I'm trying to write it. And if you support this channel, you can help me get there. Please like and subscribe, and like, you know, get on my Patreon or something. I don't have I should set up a Patreon. Anyway, I love you all. Thank you for tuning in. Stay queer.
So if you ask me how I'm doing, I'm feeling peppy, sprightly, spry. I'm getting by. I'm getting by. And it's something I'd like to demystify. It's not a phase. I'm not confused. Not indecisive. I don't have the gotta choose moves. I don't care if you wear high heels or a tie. You might just catch my eye because I'm definitely bi.